Welcome back, everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk. This time we've got Xoaquin Flores, also known as the Florist of Telegram. How you doing?
I'm good.
Welcome back. Do you want to give a brief introduction as to who you are and why you are the most banned person on the internet? Maybe even before Alex Jones?
Why I'm the most banned person, but I think it comes from, I guess this is just background. I think it just comes from a lot of well, today people know what NAPO is, but sort of like before NAPO was still NAPO, right? And I got removed from Twitter, I think from people like this actually, but yeah, I lost 250,000 followers at some point there. And then on Facebook, I was eliminated for, and I'm very careful about my stuff. It was clear that they just, saw me as a problem, which is very weird because I'm just, a drop of water in the ocean of everybody else. So, but I think algorithmically or whatever, but I also appeared in a couple of reports from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Treasury Department and stuff like that. So I got letters and warnings, and I wasn't brought in to testify or anything, but I don't know what the deal is, but yeah.
Excellent. So we're here today, and we're going to talk about color revolutions, which is something of a specialty of yours, from what I understand. It is kind of like a thing that you focus on, and you talk about it often on your Telegram. We'll leave a link to your Telegram down below. It is the only place where you can find the Florist, also known as Xoaquin Flores. Tell us what you've got lined up for us today. We've got some videos of Yerevan. I wanted to talk to you about color revolutions, seeing as it's your specialty and seeing as it's something that keeps happening all around the world.
Yeah. It's color revolutions. My intersection with them, and having been coming from a background of practicing the methods, coming in my life and work experience in doing these AstroTurf projects. They're called AstroTurf at one level, and as in fake grassroots, right? Because that's an essence of color revolutions is the hyper reality that this is a grassroots phenomenon at every level. And I would say in my work in consulting, political parties in power in some different countries, and working, based upon my work previously in creating the AstroTurf conditions for these type of color revolution activities. Previously, I think that this is it puts me in a good position to speak, like in a good form about it and an informed way. Otherwise, I wouldn't really share my opinions about it. But I'm actually, I guess you could say, a former color revolutionary and also person who consults people who don't want to be color revolution. So yeah, that's.
That's a very interesting way to put it. Don't want to be color revolution. Just so the viewers don't get bored visually, we're going to have some samples of random color revolutions playing in the background, some of which I didn't even know were color revolutions or had never heard of, including Tiananmen Square. Do you want to, like, I learned that from the other day when I was talking to one of our other guests, Matt Earhart.
Yes.
And I had no idea. Do you wanna like elaborate on the fact that color revolutions span back in time a lot longer than we think? They're not like a 90s phenomenon.
They go back quite a while. It's really debatable how far back they go, but I think it's more important, like, if I were to say what I thought the first color revolution was, it probably not give people the right idea about what I think about many things, and how it actually works. Because why I'm really here is because there's a lot of understanding about what color revolutions are.
Okay.
And saying what is an example of it doesn't inform anybody, because people are coming into this with a lot of fucking confused ideas in the first place. And I'd like to help to bring some clarity to what a color revolution actually is. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you take it from the top, as in like give us like the simplest terms, what is actually happening when a color revolution happens? Like, let's
Sure.
say
The color
there's
revolution. Yeah, this is
go
one.
on.
It's one sentence. This is the rule, right? This is the rule. A color revolution is effectively a coup, which is justified in some simulacrum of media at some level as being a popular uprising. So it's a
Hmm.
coup. It's a coup that is given all the dressings and appearances and simulacrum and hyperreality of a popular uprising, like a grassroots uprising. And that's why I use the term AstroTurf to describe,
Hmm.
you know, that. That's actually an
Astro
industry term.
AstroTurf, for those who don't know, is that like fake grass that you get on those fake soccer and whatever pitches that
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it
like the
comes
plastic
actually from
stuff.
Texas. It was first used in the Astrodome in Texas as the indoor stadium. So that's where the term comes from. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that. You learn something new every day, and not just about color revolutions. So getting back to let's say these
Yeah, our
incidents
color
that happen
revolutions.
all
You
over
said
the
China.
world.
In what way was so? I think so that's the thing is that like um, color revolutions don't invent typically don't invent the core issues that lead to a population being like disgruntled or disaffected with their government. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
like it has to typically or ideally you have real existing issues and then you're using professional organizers and media to get the population to frame those issues and connect certain things in a certain way narratively, and then the result has to be having some critical mass where at least some important or significant popular figures or ones that the media has chosen to focus on are calling for the regime to step down. You see what I mean? Like that's the main idea is like the regime steps down.
Yeah. Like instead of asking for like actual things that will benefit, they end up asking for change in government without having clear goals as to, you know.
What's going to happen next? I think that's an important thing. Do we have real going yet or
Yeah, yeah.
all right, yeah. So which one is this?
This is Yerevan.
Yeah, so this was like Yerevan part one, like probably 2016 or 17.
Yeah, 16.
And yeah, this was called Electric Yerevan, right? And I think this is an important case study because it involves like enough of the elements that you can understand, right? So you had like this basically dynasty ruling Armenia for since the collapse of communism in Armenia. And so sometimes people don't like that, especially if it's seen as being an unmovable dynasty or just like power kind of only looking to appear to change hands. But the underlying assumption is that you have to understand, like psychologically, how Western audiences, for whom the primary point of the external propaganda about a color revolutionary process is aimed at, okay, how they interpret like what's normal. You see what I'm saying? Like, like in Western parliamentary systems, you have
Hmm.
basically, or presidential or constitutional systems, you have the possibility to have like one leader in power for a long time. Sometimes it's ruled out though by the Constitution. Um, but the assumption is that leaders would have to become at some point unpopular so that you'd want to actually remove them from power through like an election mechanism or something like that. So while that seems kind of intuitive to some people, as a from a sociological perspective, like the sociological imagination, C. Wright Mills, et cetera, like they tell us and it informs us not to try to evaluate things from our own presupposed value set. So I have to actually engage the subject of the color revolution at the level of mass psychology, and then at the level of the technical and dynamic components and the kinetic effects that you normally see. Like in all this real is all the kinetic stuff, and that's more interesting to people visually, right? The behind the scenes stuff is like 99% of it though, and that you can't, there's no video for that, right? Because those are like conversations and very boring meetings and phone calls and stuff. So yeah. But what we see is very interesting. So what's
I just wanna. This is also Yerevan. It's labeled as the clashes between protesters and police. By the way, all the footage goes to everybody there, and everything that we say here is sarcasm and parody. Nothing is real.
Comedian, yeah.
Yeah, this is all comedy. Like, share, subscribe, all that other good stuff. Leave comments below. Also, the footage is credit to like the individual agencies who posted them. This is all from YouTube. And I just want to say that when you were sending me all these videos, because I asked you for like some visuals in the background, because this is YouTube, I noticed like a pattern. It's often like, there's walking, and then there's violent protests, and then after that, shooting, like in other places like Libya and Syria.
Yeah, one of the
everybody forgets that
title. Well, the titles of all of these all say like protester shot or something like this.
Yeah.
That's part. I mean, these are like, look, you've got the strategy, you've got stratagems, and you've got tactics, and shooting on a crowd is a tactic in some scenarios of color revolution, but they're not. Those are the kind of things that almost every shooting is part of a color revolution, but not all color revolutions, and many of them don't include that kinetic component. So it's kind of like all stop signs are red, but not all red things are stop signs kind of thing. So yeah, it's like, but people confuse. I think the biggest obstacle in understanding color revolutions is that people are trying to impart their own ideological, perspective into why the protest is not legitimate. You know what I mean? And because a lot of these NGOs connected to George Soros are so much connected to being seen as part of color revolutionary processes, they conflate George Soros's kind of stated ideology of like left liberalism, like pro-market, open society, capitalism plus democracy of the liberal left variety, right? Like that's the main Sorosian formula, but people are confused because that doesn't mean that that's what the protesters are all about. And also there's other movements that don't reflect that at all. And sometimes the Sorosian or other structures are not building those types of movements per se, if you follow, right? Yeah, so there's the biggest mistake is that people want to think that that color revolutions are somehow a Marxist idea, or that Soros is a Marxist, and this is like not correct. It really bastardizes or vulgarizes the language. It's true that there are many things in sociology that are informed by Marx, but that doesn't mean that it's like sociology is kind of its own field, and it's weaponized, but that doesn't mean that the aims of color revolutions are to create like a Marxist society. Like that's one part of the internet that believes so, because they connect it to Soros, who they've mislabeled as a Marxist or so. It's just a very strange. The internet's a very big place. I can't debate every internet person, but it's like, but these are just among the many 10 or 15 main misconceptions. Listening to your lives
was hilarious, because you often point out that anybody over the age of 13 can get on the internet, and you don't need a license to be on the internet. So yeah, right. You never know who you're debating on the other side of the internet.
Yes. I refuse to engage with anonymous people as a rule, and that's it. I respect people's desire for anonymity, but that's an illusion. Like, it's better just to understand that if you're going to try to say something with any consequence in the world, that you have to be a real existing person that knows that, you know, your entire whatever, your phone is tapped, your internet is, you know, viewed on a screen in the same real time that you're viewing it or whatever, you know, by AI. So
Yeah.
it's not, there's no, you have to have a totally transparent, no fear of anything kind of attitude and approach to security. And when it comes to doxing or things like that, right? So
Hmm.
you have to be dox proof basically just by not hiding anything or operating under the illusion that you can be anonymous in some way.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and also it also breeds too much, like, if security agencies want to know who you are, they're going to find out.
Yeah.
The real effect that a lot of anonymity in trying to say important things has on the internet is that the people can't be trusted because you don't know who it is. Like, we found out that there's a couple of, you know, bloggers on Substack, you know, who are relatively anonymous, who are pretending to be kind of like Russians or Russia experts, but it turns out that they had only lived in Russia for a short time in the scheme of things, like maybe, you know, 10 years out of their whole life. And but maybe their whole life is only 20 years old, so they can say, or 30 years old, so they can say they lived there since they were 20 years old or something, but then they were kicked out of Russia. You see what I mean? So there's like a lot of people, and you just don't know um, what they're all about. And the thing is that even though through their broadcasts or over time, they might disclose things that their real followers will know, oh no, his name is such and such, he lives in so and so. Provocative media or shocking concepts that go viral, if the person is an anonymous person at that moment of presentation, then all of the real personality features that would work against, or biographical facts that would work against them having credibility with you, are not on the radar screen at all.
Yeah.
And perceptions only have to be true at the moment of encounter, and even if later you get a different impression about that person, aspects of those ideas still are in your mind and are part of your own opinion formation. That's why these people have to be outed and routed right away for the rats
Hmm.
that they are. That would be Rollo Slav Squat or and a few other people like this, just for example. I mean,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so um, now a color revolution. The other thing that people misunderstand is that there's often truly legitimate discontent with what's going on. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
that's why that's why we look so much at real issues. You know, um, it's not like people come in and invent the problems.
Hmm.
I can give you an example from, I think, labor and community organizing, which is in my background, my professional experience, uh, is a good example because from the perspective of the owners, right, of a company where the workers are being organized, like, they would like to have some narrative in their own mind that everyone was happy until these rabble rousers came, insulted or infiltrated, and tried to, you know, rabble rouse the workers and to convince them
Hmm.
that they're not content. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Like the discontent was there before people organized. It's just that
exactly, exactly,
when people organize, then the, let's say, management in this company, fictitious that you're
right.
talking about, it blames the organizers for the discontent that it's been piling up basically among the workers, is what you're
That's
getting
it.
at.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, but the thing that's important to understand, having said that, is that there can be real issues, but then organizers will connect them to fake issues. You see
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they'll give false attribution to the whole dynamic, or they'll just play politics, like blaming.
Hmm.
You know, one of the biggest tricks in politics is to work to undermine something when you're not in power, right? And then blame the authorities for the fact that this institution or this thing is undermined.
Yeah.
You see, right? And so a lot of politics is sort of sabotaging things, and then blaming the advocates for the fact that none of their projects can ever seem to work. Right. So that's also done in color revolutionary, like laying the groundwork is huge. And the reason that I say, well, in all this video clip is like kinetic manifestations, right? Because that's what people really see. But there's like the planning, like strategic aspect, and that's very important before as a predicate. But there's a larger predicate to this, which is the soft power, which is like ideological, like how aspirational concepts of lifestyle. Like if you're a 17-year-old girl from Mali, right? Success in life is what? Success is like living in Paris, right? Because of that's how soft power works, right? So how people see themselves as having succeeded or improved, what it means to be, and usually these are associations to class and what your position in society is, yeah? And so the soft power thing is probably the most important framing aspect of this, yeah? So yeah, the Chinese, you mentioned, like Matt Ehret was explaining about the truth about Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
So I think, so he's not a Maoist or a communist or a Deng Xiaopingist or what, right? He's not, okay. Neither am I. So the reason that it's important to see, or what's important to see in Tiananmen Square was that like the people that were protesting were a mix of different people, and the students there were different types of student groups, and they had different types of complaints. And interestingly, and this is why I set up this understanding stuff, okay? It was these kind of Deng Xiaoping and Hu Jintao reforms that were market driven. You see what I'm saying? That although we can see in hindsight that the austerity or the change in how wealth was divided in China went in a more market direction. In hindsight, we can see that placed them in the position that they are today geopolitically, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, the economics of Mao, right? So, but many of those protesters were actually protesting against the negative consequences of liberal market reforms. Like they weren't protesting for more liberal market reforms.
Yeah.
But the thing is that because these liberal market reforms were also not very popular among many Chinese peasants and stuff. And the reason that these students care so much about that is because they were one of the last generations to come out of this very strong attempt for like a meritocratic thing of like digging deep into the peasantry, giving standardized tests, and then the smart ones or the good ones were going to these universities. So these kids were from the peasantry. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also the political mechanisms, even though the economic stuff like wasn't going to grow anything, talking before the reforms, like the Dengism, basically, so-called Dengism, before those reforms, there were more, this is going to be counterintuitive to how people understand things, okay? But there were actually more, you would say, grassroots democratic functions in large parts of Chinese society. And in order to get these kind of more pro-market reforms in place, they had to kind of constrict the more grassroots democratic mechanisms that weren't popular. I'm not talking what I think or what you fucking think about what is a good economy. We're talking about what people felt and believed in explaining color revolutionary processes, right? So on the one hand, those students had this idea that they wanted more democracy and less market reforms. but the CNN and the media focused on the pro-democracy part, but then acted like that they were protesting against the communist system. They were the ones singing the Internationale, like in Tiananmen Square. Like they were singing the communist anthems in protest against what they saw was maybe even like some kind of counter-revolutionary process going on in China under Deng and afterwards. So
what
does that
you're
make
saying,
sense?
what you're saying is that there was legitimate concerns and reasons to protest, and they wanted less liberalization, from what I'm getting, and CNN AstroTurfed it to be more liberalization, basically, like
Yes.
presented it as something else.
Yes, as something else. And then, and of course, you have some intellectuals, and then you're going to have some Taiwanese people, and the media can interview all these people to give as a Chinese voice, like some narration to what you're seeing. And then Soros was heavily involved in that too. And we're still seeing the consequences in China today, like of that. But yeah, these were people. This is just what happened there. But the lies that were coming out was that there were shooting, or that tanks had run people over. And I think that's based in that image of that student standing in front of the tank, right? But the lesson from that story is like twisted, because the point is that the tank did not run over the student. Like the point is that the government did not use violence of any scale against the protesters. But in the media, but Soros and others were trying to get this to like create a further political crisis where, separately from liberalization, because you can liberalize in a national sovereign way, can't you, right? Like you can privatize things, but privatize them into the hands of indigenous people, right? Of your ruling class, that's indigenous, yeah? That's very different from having like foreign owners or something like that. So this was a Soros foreign coup to manipulate this weird dynamic that had emerged. You see, but it would be wrong to say that like Soros had brought in the liberal reformers into China. Like communists might say that. You see what I mean? That might be a communist argument. But the truth is that the communist leadership saw the dead end of an overly command control economy. You see what I mean? So, but in trying to make those reforms stick, you're going to get popular backlash. Actually, these were more the traditional Chinese communist youth. But they had, and it's like, well, then why were they for democracy? Well, because you have to know what Chinese communist youth believed in at this time, you see. And it might not be what you think communists think. So, yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of terms in geopolitics that get thrown around, like communist, and they all have like these, subjective meanings, depending on who's using them. That's what I've come to understand over the last year or so.
It's real simple. A communist is a Marxist-Leninist. Like that's very simple. That's it. If you're not a Marxist-Leninist, you're not a communist. Now, you can be accused of using what has been attributed to communist tactics or communist techniques or whatever the fuck that means, but yeah, a communist is a Marxist-Leninist. If you're not a Marxist-Leninist, you're not a communist. And that's a specific ideological commitment. Now, you might hate communism, and then you might hate some other leader so much that you're like, in your mind, it makes sense that they're a communist. But that's in your own fucking mind, you know?
Yeah. Often when you start your lives, you say that it's coming to you from Belgrade, the center of your world, and soon to be
center of ours. That's right.
You're based in Belgrade, as am I, and everybody has heard of the color revolution of Otpor, who later became a brand.
Right. In fact, that's it right there. That's right in front of what is now the Plato bookstore. That's right there by the university.
Yeah.
Student Park is right behind them. So these are students, actually. This is right by that's in there, in that building on the left right there today is a little like bookstore and cafe called Plato. So I know exactly where this is. This is right. This is just meters away from Knez Mihailova, like the main walking promenade. This is AP, right? Which is definitely supports color revolutions wherever they can. um, yeah, this was this is like, again, right? So you had, what was going on is Milosevic was trying to counter the dissipation of Yugoslavia that had been planned at by the Club of Rome and the Vatican, and really through NATO structures and intelligence, though. But organizationally, you have a definitive Club of Rome meeting about this, and it was really decided that after Tito was gone, that you would try to separate Yugoslavia. And by putting in leaders through the communists, because there was no heir to Tito, Yugoslavia for that period of time, 8 or 9 or 10 years, was ruled by a committee, and even during that time, the committee like dissolved the communist party per se, and it became like the communist organization or something, communist clubs. It was really weird. And then, and then during this time, the communists rebranded as socialists to be more in line with either they had been called socialists. The Yugoslavia is kind of a unique case, but at the time that you kind of get into the 90s, all of the communists were socialists. And but what Milosevic is trying to do in the 90s is to have his own kind of color revolutions, let's say, of getting local populations in these different Yugoslav federal republics to kind of overthrow, and using bureaucratic and other mechanisms too, like horizontal ones and top down, combination with some kind of tepid protests, Lukish protests. And so some of the reaction against Milosevic was from the different Yugoslav republics, his attempts to kind of hold it together. And but these are like the students in Belgrade that you see, like, you can see already you have purple hair girls. You already have you have people dancing like in raving, like raver style. This is like 1999 or 98 here by this point, you see.
Yeah,
So,
there's also a bunch of EU flags at the protest, which is hilarious.
yeah. It meant something different at that time to many people, though. You know what I mean? It's not what it means today.
Oh wait, you're talking about the protests back then. I thought you were talking about the recent ones.
Oh no, I'm talking about the protest back then.
Yeah.
Back then you already had the purple hair girls and stuff. Like, Belgrade. You can understand things through subculture, okay, and places that are rural, or places that are. This is at this time historically. Today things are internet and self-referential, and subcultures don't always even have a geographic, location.
Yeah.
But spatially speaking, in the past, like, rural places have metalheads, and urban cosmopolitan centers have punk scenes. So metal scenes, like heavy metal, were typically understood as provincial, and punk and new wave were considered cosmopolitan in the working class sense, if that makes, like, urban cosmopolitan. You follow? But also not just working class, but also art scenes, and these would be many even of the children of people who themselves were like communist bureaucrats or socialist bureaucrats in Yugoslavia, right? So Belgrade was already a Western European city for many decades, even into the probably beginning of the 20th century. You can find reel of Belgrade in 1900 and 1910 and stuff that's beautifully restored, and you'll see a fascinating mix of people that look like Western European dressed people, and then you have people that look like Ottomans or Greeks, in that dress style. I know it's going to piss off some Greeks, like, you know,
and some Ottomans.
but people understand it's the same fashion. They understand it's the same hats and the same coats and stuff. So
Yeah.
But yeah, this is not at all like Prague. This is not at all like most of Ukraine today, or this is not at all like many other places. Like Belgrade is unique in terms of how Western, and in that way that Western was already starting to mean that, like in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, you know, like for that reason, the Yugoslav government, it created Yugo rock.
Yeah.
Like Yugo rock is basically 60s and 70s, like classic rock, acid rock, druggy hippie rock that was government created by the communists. You see what I'm saying? It's fascinating anyway. So this is how you understand these cultural things. So a lot of the so-called democracy leaders in this time had maybe been in rock and roll bands and stuff like that as teenagers. You see what I mean? So, but then they were breaking with Yugo rock, and they were trying to keep bringing in like new wave and other elements of, you know, it's a complex thing, but the culture stuff, this is all about soft power, what I'm describing, you know, and the soft power is like the bubble or the universe or, you know, the uterus,
the background,
the background, but it's all encompassing. It's the ether,
it's the
you know.
Yeah.
It's the ether that this stuff is popping up in. So that's a very important thing, and it's not about any particular ideology. It's just about like what works. So if in Ukraine it's Nazis, then it's Nazis. If in Belgrade in the 90s it's liberals, then it's liberals. If it, you know what I mean? It
in
just
Iraq,
goes like
in Iraq, if it's jihadis, then it's jihadis.
In Iraq, if it's jihadis, then it's jihadis. In Syria, too. Libya,
Bosnia 3.
Bosnia, yes. So this is like actually very important that you raise that. Like, so the first color revolution, now having established that, you could probably say was the French Revolution. And
what's their cry to arms? Égalité, liberté, fraternité.
That's right. Yeah, those are all decent things. You see what I mean? And like but just remember that a color revolution is a coup that's justified by some popular uprising. Okay. Now you could probably narrow that, and then you could introduce what you would call like I would call it like the Gene Sharp era, or the Gene Sharp paradigm. And that doesn't really come in until
Who is Gene Sharp for us illiterate people?
So Gene Sharp is one of the primary theoreticians of color revolutions, right? And his main protege is Srđan Popović, who's I call them anti-Serbs or former Serbs, because they lose their Serbianness when they decide when they're committed to destroying the Serbian project, which is of course cultural linguistic, you know. When they're committed to destroying the Serbian project, they actually are anti-Serbs. Like Marina Abramović, you can't call her a Serb. She's a witch, right? And a Satanist, right? Serbia is Orthodox and against witchcraft, so she's obviously anti-Serb, you know. So you have like Gene Sharp. Gene Sharp, in turn, took many of the concepts about community organizing, which is derivative of labor organizing, from another gentleman named Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky was a Democrat, anti-communist, and he was in favor of what is called yellow internationalism, which is very similar to the vision of Soros in a way. This is kind of strange, but there's the original vision for open society was supposed to include the Yellow International. And the Yellow International are basically like the political parties of the second of the Second Communist International or the Second Socialist International, but they're
Why is it called
anti-communist.
yellow? Why is it called yellow?
It's
Not
called
be red?
yellow. I think, I don't know if it comes from like fucking Norway or what point or whatever, but it's not red, you know. They're yellow. And it's supposed to be now technically the logo or the color international today are the red roses. But red roses is also like what communists use on Partisan Day and Victory Day all across Greece and Italy and Spain. Like people put red roses out. And so it's a very confusing thing. But just understand, you could almost say that there's anti-communist, communist. Here's a joke. So Hoover, right? FBI, anti-communist squads. And they're arresting everybody, right? And so one of his officers comes to him and says, but sir, like this guy's an anti-communist. And Hoover says, I don't care what type of communist he is.
The joke's on us because Antifa has become fascist now.
Well, that's really it. Yeah, that's really it. Yeah. So it's yeah. So you have like in understanding these ideas or what happens is like you have there was an idea that it would be eventually it did include the Second International. Like it just took a long time. But you can there's your purple hair girl right there. That's 1999 or something.
Yeah.
See, they're talking about free love.
They're talking in English. That's all you need to know, man. As soon as I see like protests in Iran and they have English signs, I'm a little suspicious of it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So from
have, like, this guy. Wow. So yeah, you have like in this process, you have so many different moving parts, but you really would graph it all out and everything. You have to make a chart, and but we're just discussing some aspect of it that helps people understand like maybe their own problems in understanding it. You know what I mean? Like trying to help people understand what it really is. And there's like another idea that's been circulating that like I'm friendly to the idea, and if people say it, I'll agree. But I also have an opinion moving behind the scenes that's kind of larger, I think, which is this idea is that the period of color revolutions has come to an end. And the rationale for that is that people like myself, have been educating governments and citizens about how they work at certain levels. But to think that governments don't understand what a color revolution is, even back then, is wrong. Like the main conservative critique of revolutions historically is that they are effectively color revolutions. And that's kind of a wrong analysis, even though there's so many layers of truth to it. You see the problem there. So like if the conclusion is that the protests have no legitimacy, then that's just, the talking points of people in power. Right. You're saying there's no way to speak truth to power unless you're an asset of some foreign government. See, that's a big problem that's happening right now, like in the United States, where everyone who says something about U.S. policy on Russia or against Biden or for Trump is a Russian agent. That's like a whole thing. You see what I mean? And it's meant, so now the Democrats are using this basically conservative talking point. When I conservative, I mean that only from the point of one definition of conservative, which again is a big problem. Because conservative means many different things, but I mean that in the most sense of conserving power. Like though the attitude towards power from the perspective of those in power is typically conservative because they don't want to change things if the status quo works for them. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So but that's not what many people mean by conservative when they say that. They tend to mean something more grassroots or traditional popular as opposed to liberal elites that are actually trying to change the status quo. So this is a different dynamic that has occurred.
Yep.
But I think that opens up a good segue to understand that there's coordination with elites within a country with foreign groups when there's color revolution often. But it's not
No.
necessary. Yeah, but it's a very interesting, like the color revolutionary techniques are political techniques that are weaponized against another country. So, like, what happened inside the United States can be described as a type of coup that used color revolutionary techniques, but you would have to say that Biden was working as an agent, or the Biden people were working as an agent for some foreign entity, which I think is a harder case to make than rather they represent a powerful socioeconomic and power clique or power group within the society that was attempting to prevent a democratically elected president from assuming office.
Yeah. We've been going for about 45 minutes. I don't like to take these too long, and I know what we've got lined up. We've got quite a bit more to talk about. So I'm suggesting that we cut this short, let people have this upload, and then we'll be back immediately to continue some more. Is there anything that you want to say as like a summary to this little intro to color revolutions?
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't come into looking at it like as if the protesters are full of shit or the protesters are all correct. It's like there's a very strange mix of things. And it's just that a color revolution is actually just a coup that's justified by some popular uprising. And the other thing is that just because a government knows that this is a coup being disguised as a popular uprising, like, doesn't mean that they can stop it. So the idea that we're at the end of the age of color revolutions because now everyone knows what it is a false belief.
Yeah.
When you really get to the details. But I understand what people mean when they say it, and I would support that view if they mean that today governments understand what contingency options they have that go deeper and are more effective compared to sending the police out to disperse the crowd, because that actually falls into the trap.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Xoaquin, thank you. Let's play some music. Everyone, like, share, subscribe. We'll be right back.